Sorry, camera batteries gave out there. So back into it. Yeah. So as I was saying, Coast Watchers, the loyal Melanesians, so it was far worse. And that concludes our Coast Watchers talk. Now I'm going to move on to a slightly more obscure unit, or guerrilla force, I should say. Now, before I do, I think just to illustrate how important the Coast Watchers were, excuse me, Field Marshal Slim, who in my opinion is one of the most underrated commanders of the Second World War, put the Japanese success, or the British failure, however you want to look at it, in the early part of the war, down to the fact that the early war, the Japanese had very good intelligence from their networks they had established across Southeast Asia, and the British knew nothing. They were completely in the dark most of the time, but towards the end of the war, these roles were completely reversed. It was the Japanese who had very poor intelligence, and the British were getting better and better intelligence as the war goes on, which we'll actually see, because I'm moving into that sort of area in a second. Alright, so back to it. We're going to look at the Philippines experience, mainly on the island of Mindanao, sorry, Mindano, and the Moro Muslims that were fighting there. Obviously, the Americans were kicked out of the Philippines pretty unceremoniously, I must say. That's a bit harsh, really. But yeah, pretty much as soon as they'd left, guerrilla groups started setting up. There was a anyway, it doesn't matter. One island, there was a dozen groups clustered around one area. But where we're focused on is Mindanao. Now the fighters, initially, they fought each other all over the Philippines. You had religious tensions, ethnic tensions, ideological tensions, tribal affiliations. Not very effective. But then they started to get their act together. And in the area we're looking at, a chap called Colonel Wendell Fertig, I hope I said that right. He basically brought them under one command in the name of sort of nationalism and for the greater liberation, I should imagine. So yeah, as soon as the Americans left, basically the Filipino troops they trained melted away. They withdrew into the jungles and onto the little islands, taking with them rifles, machine guns, submachine guns, and ammunition that they could carry, explosives, hand grenades, that sort of stuff, for which to fight the Japanese with. Now Commander Fertig, Colonel Fertig, offered his troops 20 centavos, which was roughly equivalent to 10 US cents, and a bullet for every pair of Japanese ears brought back to him, which I think is quite a nice touch. And at its height, it was around 33,000 guerrillas that he had under his command, and they'd pretty much been fighting. When the Americans came back, they'd been fighting the Japanese pretty much non-stop for 3 years. So they're a pretty decent outfit. So initially, it was the defence forces armed with obviously what they had, but it was also the tribal units as well, and they were armed with poison bows and machetes, which it's not ideal. But as the sort of reports started filtering out about these Moro Muslims and what they were doing, MacArthur took an interest and actually started sending them supplies, ammunition, radios. So he also had an intelligence network with them. So I mean, they set up over 150 coastal watching stations, not coast watchers, but coastal watching stations, which gave back valuable intel. And they also helped with air rescue down American airmen in the theatre. In the US invasion to retake the Philippines, they blew up bridges and supply dumps, which obviously helped reduce Japanese mobility, but also reduce their fighting effectiveness, obviously because their supply lines were being cut, were probably being hit as well by the guerrillas themselves. They after sort of the initial invasion and the main guerrilla sort of tactics that you'd sort of expect from the French resistance in France, for example, then they moved into as reserve troops, reinforcing troops, not direct attack troops, although I'm sure there was some instances of this, but more sort of reinforcements to help with the main thrust. Okay, and that's really all you've got for the Moro Muslim front at the time. Now we're going to move into Malaya. Now Malaya fell rather quickly, it has to be said. Mainly it was through the catastrophic misjudgment and incompetence of the British High Command, and the Allied High Command, I should say. They didn't understand the ground they were fighting on. They completely underestimated the Japanese, who had been fighting a major armed conflict in China for years, so I don't really see how they could, but we're not getting into that. And they're also, the troops under their command, some were partly trained, but they weren't up to scratch. They weren't where they should have been to be fighting a major power in the theatre. Whereas the Japanese, they were veteran troops. A lot of these troops had come down from China and all the fighting up there, so they were also well motivated, they were well led, and they were a lot of the time they were very confident in their own abilities, and rightly so in most cases. After the British were pushed out of Malaya, they had there was some left behind forces, and also a group calling themselves the Malayan People's Anti-Japanese Army, a lovely turn of catchy name, you know what I mean? Which had been set up, the first of which was ready by the 10th of Jan 42, mainly made up of captured communists, and organised by the British after they'd captured these communists into 8 regiments, totaling some 7,000 guerrillas. The Japanese army, MPAJA, that was. But also you had small guerrilla groups and some armed bandit groups that were supposedly helping the British, but really didn't care either way. They were just making themselves a living, which is fair enough, really. Now the anti-Japanese forces were mainly made up of the ethnic Chinese. In fact, the MPAJA was pretty much under the command of the chap called Chin Peng, who was the leader of the Malayan Communist Party, if I'm right, at the period. So yeah, they were trained at the Special Training School, STS 101, in Singapore, and they were also used in conjunction with the MPAJU, or Malayan People's Anti-Japanese Union, which was the civil and intelligence gathering side of it. And they were set up to fight the Japanese. they would fight the Japanese, provide the British and Allies with intel, and aid Allied operatives within Malaya. Their rifles, shotguns, SMGs, a mix of things. Some they were issued with from the British, some they captured, others such as shotguns you